One of the best ways to get a new bloke on board is to create a great first impression that lasts. G'day mates and fellow adventurers, my name is Mordecai. Before we get started, I want all of you to meet the new intern who arrived recently. Javier, would you mind introducing yourself? If you insist, Mordecai. Hi everyone, I'm Javier. That's all. I'm going back to being the camera kobold. Okay. Well, at the very least, Javier is a lot easier to work with than, say, Pete. Pete, why are you burning one of my scripts? Because why not? In fairness to Javier, sometimes being brand new to a job or a hobby can feel rather overwhelming, especially when you find yourself in an environment which is unsupportive and or uncooperative, which is what makes new player-friendly tables enticing to new players. Shocking, right? One of the advantages of such tables is being able to get new players to start learning about the game, how to play properly, and what table etiquette is about. It also offers a chance to identify potential problem behaviour early so that it can be resolved fairly easily. However, not every table is necessarily welcoming to newcomers. Sometimes you will have games which predominantly feature gatekeepers. And something that we should be aware of is that vetting a player and gatekeeping are distinct from each other. With vetting, you're trying to catch problems with the goal of resolving them before they escalate in-game. And you're also trying to keep your game as accessible to as many players as possible. Whilst gatekeeping can be thought of as a more extreme version of that, most of the time gatekeeping is more akin to weeding out potentially good players in favour of those with a certain mindset, usually being one that conforms to their standards. And sometimes those standards can be simply awful, or feature problem player behaviour. Before we get started with the story for the video, if I get to 1000 subs before the end of 2023, I have plans to cover an RPG story which predates the subreddit and contains one of the most infamous characters in all of tabletop role-playing game history. Let's delve into the often terrifying world of r/RPGHorrorStories. Today's narrative is titled, "My first gaming group nearly ruined TTRPGs for me, and probably did for several others," and is written by user Tenagon the GM. This was an in-person group at a local gaming shop where I initially started playing Magic the Gathering. I saw on their calendar that they had bi-weekly D&D days. I'd heard it mentioned in movies and such as "That's a nerd game," but kinda liked the idea of this dramatic war game those portrayals made it out to be. So I decided to show up at the next game day. I had a concept for a character in mind, but knew nothing about the rules, as I didn't have a player's handbook at the time. I was inspired to play an archer for my first character, and conveniently, they were missing a player from their usual group who just so happened to be playing an archer. A small red flag that I didn't really think about until much later was that all of the character sheets had to stay at the shop, and could not be taken home. Fair enough. I wouldn't trust myself not to lose it or ruin it somehow, so leaving it there was probably the right thing to do. My initial experience was pretty good, though I can recall a few odd details that made me uncomfortable. Firstly, the player of the character I was borrowing for the day had, in character, got so drunk he fell into a pool the previous session, which gave every other player at the table the freedom to point and laugh at me for what the other player did. Yikes, but whatever, I'll just ignore it for now and continue to play the game. The next red flag came when combat started. They ruled that if you missed an attack roll, you would end up hitting the next nearest ally if there was one. You can imagine this made playing an archer very risky whenever marshals were near my target. I don't recall actually hitting any allies myself, but I do recall one marshal hitting another with his mace. This was not just on natural ones, but any attack that missed. A natural one would result in your weapon outright breaking, taking an action to repair depending on what you were wielding. The highlight of the session that really made me want to come back was one of the players standing up from his chair, delivering this speech about justice before making his attack, and rolling a natural one. This permanently cemented this person in my mind as the cool guy at the table, and to this day, he is one of the best players I've had the pleasure of rolling dice with. I came back 2 weeks later for the next session, this time having the freedom to build my own character. I decided that Archer really wasn't for me, and wanted something more in the fray of combat. They made a few suggestions back and forth, but the one that really caught my ear was Eldritch Knight. Now, at the time, I didn't know subclasses were a thing, so when they told me a fighter with wizard spells, I thought that meant taking levels in both wizard and fighter, so I started as a level 1 wizard, as my first character. Not ideal. The situation got worse when I actually tried to cast my spells, and the DM said, "Do you have the material components for that?" Me not understanding how components actually worked, and not having written anything on my sheet regarding components, the DM said that I couldn't cast spells that required material components. If it wasn't written down, I didn't have it. "You should have stopped in town to buy them before heading out," was the last thing said on the matter before moving on. Not that I had the coin to buy any anyways, since I hadn't written that down either. Again, first time ever filling out a character sheet, and I was under pressure to do it quickly so I wasn't holding up the game. I don't remember anything else about what happened that session. I honestly don't remember anything about what happened with that character up until his death. Which brings us to the next problem with this group. Or groups, I should say. This shop had 2 gaming tables running for 2 different groups in the same setting at the same time. Our groups were hired by 2 different factions to take down the same BBEG, but also had it out for each other. So if our paths crossed, it was basically on-site conflict. The other table consisting of veterans, and the table I was at being mostly new guys, it was an absolute slaughter, and so we all had to roll new characters. The next problem came in the form of something I initially thought was really interesting. If your character died at any point, the character sheet would be used as an NPC, resurrected as a servant to the BBEG. This made a lot of players upset, but I thought the concept was really cool. A raise in the stakes if you got careless. A few veterans actually left for good after that rule was introduced, making it very clear why they weren't coming back. But the DM still used their sheets as NPCs, though in a tasteful way, staying true to the characters' personalities. Now that I'm recalling it properly, the DM actually killed off those specific NPCs by having them hanged from a tall tree in the area we were travelling through, which was more than a bit of a jerk move. Fast forward several months to when I proposed the idea of me DMing a one-shot, whilst I was still having a very poor understanding of the rules. I was fully planning on just winging it. They told me outright that the true nature of the game is, and I'm paraphrasing here, the DM has to try and railroad the players as hard as possible, while the players do everything they can to derail the game. And then they walked me through some scenarios on how to do this exactly. This view was reinforced by 3 long-time DMs and 2 other long-time players, who agreed that this was the way the game should be played. And I actually believed them. Every group will have its own style, sure, but to try and convince someone that this is how every group plays? Absolutely not. So this is the problem with gatekeeping that I was alluding to earlier, right here. It certainly seems like this entire shop has a rather severe issue, namely that they are actively encouraging problem player behaviour. This mindset of DMs must railroad, players must break that railroad, is a form of DM versus player mentality that goes against the spirit of TTRPGs, which are meant to be fundamentally cooperative experiences. And even if the game being ran is a high lethality game with characters dropping like flies, you still have a group working together to tell a story. Let's resume. When I did run that one-shot, it was basically a horror story on its own that ultimately boiled down to, don't try to DM if you don't know the rules, especially not for players who will actively abuse the fact that you don't know the rules. One of the biggest problem players was basically the Discord moderator meme incarnate, in terms of appearance, behaviour, speech, sense of humour, and, I cannot stress this enough, odour. He was your typical that guy bard no matter what class he was playing. If the problem happened to be humanoid, his first solution would always be to screw the problem. Excuse me, what? Sometimes the problem not being humanoid wouldn't stop him? What? And player agency meant nobody else could stop him either. At the very least, I can say he never did anything without an NPC's consent, so that's something very awkward. He was a regular that was there from the day I started till the day I left, and I honestly don't know why I put up with it. Probably because it was the only in-person group in the area, and I didn't like the idea of playing online at that time. The final nail for me came in the form of what I can say in hindsight is about a third of my own fault. The three parts being one annoying character, the DM that empowered that annoying character, and the party that did nothing but harass that annoying character in and out of game. At the time, I was deep into my Undertale/Deltarune phase, and made a halfling bard based on the character Jevil, though with some actual unique quirks to him to make him my own. Just imagine a small jester with a Plague Doctor mask with a bad Joker impression for his voice, and that was it. The DM at the time was the previously mentioned cool guy, and he loved the concept I had, as well as how I was playing it. That being very wacky and cartoonish. Just sort of showing up with the party, claiming he was there with them the whole time, using an umbrella to defy gravity like Mary Poppins, but not actually negating the resulting fall damage. The rest of the party did not appreciate my antics, though I did manage to occasionally get a few laughs here and there. The third part of the problem came in the form of being greeted at the start of each following session with "Oh gosh, not this guy again," from one of the players as soon as I walked in the front door of the shop. He would then warn guards in the game to keep an eye on my character, because he knew I was trouble, even though I hadn't actually done anything illegal at any point. I was a bat at haggling, sure, but that alone did not make me a criminal. He, on the other hand, he stole and destroyed several magic items I had purchased because they were cursed. The effects of one of them was simply every creature that falls asleep within 30 feet of it have nightmares. Instead of simply sleeping more than 30 feet away from the object, he opted to melt it down into a disc and throw it into the ocean whilst having the rest of the party hold me down. That, along with his near-constant insults, wore me down, and I just stopped going. No real explosion or anything, I just stopped. I remember seeing a lot of other players coming and going over the years, so I can imagine they initially saw the problems that I only saw in hindsight. Though I do wonder if this group actually did manage to permanently turn people away from the hobby as a whole. Fast forward about a year later, and a couple friends of mine wanted to learn D&D, and asked me to teach them. I was hesitant at first, but eventually decided to write up another one-shot for them. I walked them through character creation, keeping it as simple as possible since it was only a one-shot, so stuff that didn't matter just didn't matter. Seeing them both getting into character and just having fun in the little story I made up for them really showed me how messed up my previous games had been. There was no arguing, no debating rulings, no drama, just genuine nerdy fun. After that, I became a forever DM for multiple groups over the following years. In summary, my local gaming store featured several problems, including a very sink or swim group that only went halfway with teaching the rules, a player versus DM mentality that went both ways no matter which person was DMing, making me think it was universally how the game was meant to be played. After those events took place, I took a year-long break from D&D, only to DM a one-shot for some close friends that re-sparked my love for the game. And that's where the story ends. This is definitely one of those game stores which features a kind of social group that dominates the way that TTRPGs are played at the store. So whilst they allow new players to play at the game store tables, they don't seem to attempt to actually get the new players on board. At least, not outside of the standards established through gatekeeping. There is an entire cast of players who prioritize problem behaviour with no resolution, and a focus on encouraging such behaviour. I do confess that I am curious how the problem players at that store came to be like that. However, there is still a learning opportunity for others from the material we do have. And whilst a lesson in the dangers of mistaking gatekeeping for vetting is important, it also isn't the only lesson here. The biggest problem with DM versus player mentality is that it encourages the wrong kind of competitive spirit. Instead of players being competitive against in-game rivals, or having a fair competition between their teammates, it's more along the lines of treating players and DMs as being on opposing teams in a video game. So let's draw a parallel to, say, Unreal Tournament. In Team Deathmatch, you have a point score that represents your contribution to your team's score, you earn points and so do your teammates. You can have allies competing for those points, but they still contribute to your team winning. The DM is more akin to an allied teammate than an opposing hostile, but this mentality is effectively treating your teammates as adversaries, when TTRPGs are inherently cooperative experiences, consisting of a group that tells a story in some format. I will say that it does seem as though the problems originate more from the game store groups misunderstanding what TTRPGs are meant to be about, and thus a potential solution in this situation would be to showcase to the game store an alternatively run game. Something that focuses more on shared fun between the DM and the players, and can demonstrate that in a live environment. Although, you would have to be careful about which of the store's players you vet for the particular game. And if it all fails, you still have the group and can then move on to another location or even online to maintain the game. Overall, I am glad to hear that OP and his friends have been able to pick up their own game, and are having fun with the hobby despite the terror this particular game store could inflict on new players. Thank you for watching the video. If you like my content and want to see more or wish to support the channel, please hit the subscribe button and maybe leave the video a like. It's free to do, and every bit of support is highly appreciated. Again, thank you for watching, and I shall see you all next time. Javier? That outro was your cue to stop the recording, mate. Oh, my bad. You could have explained that earlier. That's entirely fair, mate. This is your first time helping me out with this, and I really do appreciate your help. It's not a big deal. Sure. Anyway, we should... Javier, get the camera, we're going inside. Any particular reason why... son of a...